Relax with stories that help you sleep, work, and calm your mind. Today's story is called Meeting in the Rain. We invite you to listen and support our channel by clicking subscribe and receiving channel notifications to conveniently follow the next videos. Sincerely thank you. Seattle's rain came without warning, as it always did, a silver curtain dropping over the city's narrow streets. The air was thick with the scent of wet pavement and distant coffee, and the sky churned gray, alive with the restless energy of a Pacific Northwest storm. On a quiet street tucked between weathered brick buildings, Elena Hoyne stood stranded under the sagging awning of a small cafe, her breath catching as the downpour soaked the hem of her jeans. At 28, she was a wanderer in both heart and body, a freelance photographer, with a camera slung across her chest, her dark hair pulled into a loose bun, strands escaping to cling to her damp cheeks. Her almond-shaped eyes, deep and shadowed from sleepless nights, scanned the street as if searching for something she'd lost long before the rain began. Her slim frame, wrapped in a faded leather jacket, shivered, slightly not from the cold, but from the ache of a broken love she'd left behind in another city. Her lips, full and softly curved, parted in a sigh as she pressed herself closer to the cafe's wall, her fingers brushing the rough brick. She was beautiful in a way that felt unintentional, like a painting left unfinished but all the more captivating for it. Across the street, Noah Bennett emerged from the doorway of his small bookstore, Pages and Puddles, a name that suited Seattle's moody charm. At 30, he carried himself with the quiet ease of someone who'd made peace with life's unpredictability. His broad shoulders filled out a navy sweater, the sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing forearms dusted with faint freckles and the subtle strength of hands that turned pages and carried crates of books. His hair, a warm chestnut brown, was slightly tousled, curling at the edges where the rain had caught it. His eye hazel, flecked with gold, held a depth that seemed to unravel stories without a single word. They were the kind of eyes that made you want to confess your secrets, or maybe just lean closer to see what they'd say next. His jawline, sharp but softened by a day's stubble, framed a smile that was equal parts boyish and knowing. As he stepped under the cafe's awning, his boots splashing through a shallow puddle, he glanced at Elena, and for a moment, the world narrowed to the space between them. No words passed, not yet. Just the lac-tac of rain on asphalt, the faint hum of a neon sign flickering above the cafe, and the sudden, inexplicable thump of two hearts beating louder than the storm. Elena's gaze flicked to him, her breath hitching as she took in the way his sweater clung to his chest, hinting at the lean muscle beneath. His presence was warm, like a hearth in a room you hadn't realized was cold. Noah, for his part, noticed the way her jacket hugged her slender waist, the delicate curve of her collarbone peeking from the open collar of her shirt. Her skin, a soft golden olive, glistened where raindrops had kissed it, and he found himself wondering how it would feel to brush those drops away with his fingertips. Neither moved, but the air between them crackled, charged with something neither could name. Elena shifted, her boots scuffing the pavement, and tucked a wet strand of hair behind her ear. Her fingers, long and graceful, trembled slightly not from nerves, but from the strange electricity of standing so close to a stranger who didn't feel like one. Noah leaned against the wall, his shoulder brushing the same brick hers had touched moments before, and his scent clean, like cedar and old books, drifted toward her. It was subtle, but it made her want to inhale deeper, to hold on to it like a memory she hadn't yet earned. She glanced at him again, and this time their eyes locked. His were steady, searching, with a warmth that made her chest tighten. Hers were guarded but curious, like a deer pausing at the edge of a forest, deciding whether to step into the open. The rain fell harder, a relentless drumbeat that sealed them in their shared shelter. The awning sagged under the weight of the water, dripping in rhythmic plinks onto the sidewalk. Beyond the street, the city blurred into a watercolor of lights and shapes, but under the awning, the world was sharp, vivid. Elena's lips parted as if to speak, but she caught herself, her tongue brushing the edge of her teeth in a fleeting, unconscious gesture that Noah didn't miss. His gaze dipped to her mouth for a fraction of a second, and the corner of his lips twitched, not quite a smile, but enough to send a flutter through her stomach. He shifted his weight, his hip brushing the edge of the cafe's window, and the movement drew her eyes to the way his jeans hugged his thighs, the fabric worn soft from years of wear. There was something grounding about him, something that made her want to stay exactly where she was, even as the rain soaked her boots. "You come here often?" Noah's voice broke the silence, low and warm, with a hint of humor that felt like an invitation. It wasn't a line, not really, just a way to tether the moment before it slipped away. His tone wrapped around her like a blanket, and she felt the tension in her shoulders ease, if only a little. Elena's lips curved, a small, reluctant smile that lit her face in a way that made Noah's breath catch. "Only when it rains," she said, her voice soft but clear, with a faint lilt that hinted at her Vietnamese heritage. Her eyes flicked to his, and for a moment they held each other's gaze, the rain fading to a distant hum. Her smile revealed a dimple on one cheek, a detail that made Noah want to lean closer, to memorize it like a line from a favorite book. "Lucky for me, then," he said, his voice dropping just enough to make her pulse quicken. He didn't look away, and neither did she. The space between them felt smaller now, though neither had moved. Her fingers tightened around the strap of her camera bag, and she noticed the way his hands rested loosely at his sides, strong but relaxed, the kind of hands that could hold you steady or let you go with equal grace. The rain showed no sign of stopping, and neither did the pull between them. Elena's heart raced, not from fear, but from the thrill of standing on the edge of something unknown. Noah's presence was like the rain itself, predictable, enveloping, impossible to ignore. She didn't know his name, didn't know his story, but she knew the way his eyes made her feel seen, the way his nearness made her skin hum. And Noah, watching the way her lashes caught a stray raindrop, felt a tug in his chest, a quiet certainty that this moment, this woman, was a page he'd want to read again and again. They stood there, two strangers under a leaking awning, the city fading around them. The rain was their cocoon, the street their stage, and the silence between them was loud with possibility. Elena's lips parted again, as if to say something, but she stopped, her eyes searching his face. Noah tilted his head, just slightly, and the faintest smile curved his lips, an unspoken question hanging in the air. What happens next? And in that moment, with the rain singing its endless song, they both knew whatever it was, it had already begun. The rain in Seattle didn't relent. Its steady rhythm, a heartbeat under the sagging cafe awning where Elena Hoyne and Noah Bennett stood, strangers bound by a shared shelter. The air was cool, heavy with the scent of wet earth and the faint, bitter tang of coffee drifting from the cafe's cracked open door. Elena's dark eyes flickered toward her camera bag, slung across her chest, where a few errant raindrops had seeped into the canvas. Her fingers, slender and graceful, brushed the bag's zipper, and a quiet curse slipped from her lip soft, full lips that glistened faintly from the mist. At 28, her beauty was raw, unpolished, like a photograph caught in the golden hour. Her high cheekbones framed a face that held both strength and fragility, her olive skin glowing despite the gray light. Her slim frame, wrapped in a damp leather jacket, curved subtly at the waist, and the way her jeans clung to her long legs hinted at a quiet confidence, even as her shoulders hunched against the chill. Her hair, dark and slightly wavy, escaped its loose bun in tendrils that framed her face, clinging to her neck where rain had kissed her skin. She was mesmerizing, not in a loud way, but in the way a quiet melody lingers long after the song ends. Noah, leaning against the brick wall a few feet away, watched her with a gaze that felt like a touch gentle but deliberate. At 30, he carried an effortless charm, his broad shoulders filling out a navy sweater that hugged his chest just enough to suggest the lean muscle beneath. His chestnut hair, damp from the rain, curled at the edges, brushing the tops of his ears in a way that made you want to reach out and tuck it back. His hazel eyes, flecked with gold, held a warmth that seemed to unravel you, layer by layer, and his jawline sharp, dusted with a day's stubble softened when he smiled, which he did now, a slow, easy curve of his lips that made Elena's stomach flutter. His forearms, exposed where his sleeves were rolled up, were strong, freckled, the kind of arms that could lift you effortlessly or hold you close with the same care he gave the books in his shop. His scent-seeder, paper, and something faintly spicy cut through the rain, grounding her in a way she hadn't expected. Elena unzipped her bag, her movements quick but careful, and pulled out her camera. A few drops glistened on its lens, and she frowned, her brows knitting together in a way that made her look both vulnerable and fierce. Noah's gaze lingered on her hand show. Her fingers moved with precision, how her nails, unpainted and slightly chipped, caught the dim light. He pushed off the wall, his boots scuffing the wet pavement, and reached into his pocket. "Here," he said, his voice low and warm, like a fire crackling in a quiet room. He held out a soft cotton handkerchief, its edges frayed from use, and his smile widened, crinkling the corners of his eyes. "Machine's probably fine, but as long as the heart's still beating, you're good, right?" Elena's breath caught, not at the words but at the way he said them, playful, but with a sincerity that made her chest tighten. She took the handkerchief, her fingers brushing his for a fleeting moment. His skin was warm, rough, in a way that spoke of work and care, and the contact sent a spark through her, quick and electric. She looked up, meeting his eyes, and found them steady, searching, with a glint that made her wonder what stories they held. "Thanks," she said, her voice soft but clear, tinged with a faint lilt that hinted at her roots. She wiped the camera lens with slow, deliberate strokes, her movements almost meditative, and Noah watched, captivated by the way her hands moved, how her fingers curled around the cloth with a grace that felt intimate, like a secret shared. "Ever lose a shot to the rain?" he asked, leaning back against the wall. His posture relaxed, but his attention wholly on her. His voice was an invitation, not pressing but open, like a door left ajar. He crossed one ankle over the other, his jeans pulling taut over his thighs, and Elena's gaze flicked there for a moment before returning to his face. God, he was handsome enough in a polished, magazine way, but in the way a well-loved book feels perfect in your hands, worn but timeless. She laughed, a soft, breathy sound that lit her face, revealing a dimple on her left cheek, that Noah instantly wanted to trace with his thumb. "More times than I'd like," she said, tucking the handkerchief into her pocket, her fingers lingering there as if to hold on to the moment. "Once, in Hanoi, I was chasing this perfect sunset over the lake, and the sky just opened. Lost the shot, my shoes, and half my dignity running back to my hotel." Her eyes sparkled with the memory, and the way she tilted her head, exposing the delicate curve of her neck, made Noah's pulse quicken. He chuckled, a low, rumbling sound that felt like it came from deep in his chest. "Sounds like a story worth losing a shot for," he said, his eyes never leaving hers. "My worst was in college. Tried to impress a girl by reading poetry under a tree during a storm. Book was ruined. I was soaked, and she ditched me for a guy with an umbrella." He grinned, self-deprecating, and the way his lips curved made Elena want to lean closer to catch every nuance of his expression. "Her loss," Elena said before she could stop herself, and the words hung in the air, bold and unguarded. Her cheeks flushed, a soft pink that spread across her skin, and she bit her lip, a quick, unconscious gesture that drew Noah's gaze to her mouth. Her lips were perfect full, slightly parted, with a natural gloss from the rain that made him wonder, just for a moment, what they'd taste like. He cleared his throat, shifting his weight, and the movement drew her eyes to his hands, strong and steady, resting loosely by his sides. She imagined them turning the pages of a book, or maybe brushing against her skin, and the thought sent a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with the cold. The conversation flowed, effortless, in a way that felt both foreign and familiar. They talked about the rain, how it always seemed to know when you forgot your jacket, how it turned Seattle into a city of reflections and secrets. Noah told her about his bookstore, Pages and Puddles, and how he'd named it after a childhood memory of jumping in puddles with his sister. His voice softened when he spoke of it, and Elena noticed the way his eyes crinkled, how his hands gestured in small, animated arcs, as if painting the memory in the air. She told him about her photography, how she chased light, and moments how she'd come to Seattle to escape a past that still clung to her like damp clothes. Her voice was quieter then, her eyes distant, but Noah listened with a focus that made her feel seen, truly seen, in a way she hadn't in years. The air between them was charged, not with urgency, but with a slow, simmering warmth. They stood close now, closer than strangers should, the awning's narrow shelter pulling them into each other's orbit. Elena's jacket brushed against the brick wall, and Noah's shoulder was inches from hers, his warmth a quiet contrast to the chill. She noticed the way his sweater stretched across his chest when he laughed, the faint outline of muscle that made her wonder what it would feel like to press her palm there, to feel his heartbeat. He noticed the way her hair caught the light, how the damp strands framed her face like a halo, and he wanted to reach out, to tuck one behind her ear, to see if her skin was as soft as it looked. They weren't friends, not yet, but there was a closeness that defied explanation, like two puzzle pieces clicking into place without force. It was in the way their laughter synced, the way their silences weren't awkward, but full, pregnant with unspoken thoughts. Elena felt it in the way her body leaned toward him, her hips tilting slightly, her fingers itching to brush against his. Noah felt it in the way his breath hitched when she smiled, how his hands twitched with the urge to close the distance between them. The rain was their conspirator, locking them in this moment, and neither wanted it to end. "So," Noah said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "what's the best thing you ever ran from the rain to save?" His eyes held hers, and there was something in his tone curious, teasing, but with an undercurrent that made her heart race. He leaned forward, just a fraction, and the movement brought his face closer, close enough for her to see the faint scar above his eyebrow, the way his lashes framed his eyes like a quiet promise. Elena tilted her head, her lips curving into a smile that was both shy and bold. "My heart, maybe," she said, her voice barely above the rain's murmur. "But I'm still figuring out if I saved it or not." The words were honest, raw, and they hung between them like a dare. Her eyes searched his, and for a moment, the world was just them two strangers under an awning, their breaths mingling in the damp air, their bodies alive with the pull of something new. Noah didn't reply, not with words. His smile softened, and his gaze lingered on her face, tracing the curve of her cheek, the slope of her nose, the way her lips parted, as if waiting for something. His hand twitched, as if to reach for her, but he held back, letting the moment stretch, letting the rain sing its song. And Elena, watching the way his eyes seemed to hold her without touching, felt a warmth spread through her, slow and deep, like the first sip of tea on a cold day. The rain fell on, a silver veil around them, and the conversation paused, but the connection didn't. They stood there, caught in the gravity of each other, and the street, the city, the world beyond faded to a hum. Whatever this was, it was alive, and it was only beginning. The Seattle rain was relentless, a soft, silver symphony that wrapped Elena Huyn and Noah Bennett in their shared cocoon beneath the cafe's weathered awning. The street was a blur of wet cobblestones and flickering neon, but under the dripping shelter, time seemed to slow, each moment stretching like a note held in a quiet song. The air was heavy with the scent of rain-soaked pavement and the faint warmth of coffee lingering from the cafe's open door. Elena stood with her camera bag slung across her chest, her leather jacket clinging to her slender frame, accentuating the gentle curve of her waist and the long, graceful lines of her legs. At 28, she was a vision of understated beauty. Her dark, wavy hair, damp and loose, framing her face in soft tendrils that clung to her golden olive skin. Her almond-shaped eyes, deep and shadowed with the weight of a past she hadn't shared, flickered with curiosity and something warmer, something that made her full lips part slightly, as if on the verge of a confession. Her high cheekbones caught the dim light, and the way she tilted her head, exposing the delicate curve of her neck, was an invitation she didn't know she was offering. She was breathtaking, not in a way that demanded attention, but in the way a quiet sunset steals your breath before you realize it's gone. Noah stood a breath away, his broad shoulders relaxed against the brick wall, his navy sweater hugging his chest in a way that hinted at the lean strength beneath. At 30, he was the kind of man you'd dream of meeting on a rainy day, his chestnut hair curling at the edges, damp from the storm, brushing the tops of his ears in a way that begged to be touched. His hazel eyes, flecked with gold, held a warmth that seemed to see straight through to your soul, and his jawline, sharp but softened by a day's stubble, curved into a smile that was both boyish and knowing. His forearms, exposed where his sleeves were rolled up, were strong, freckled, and dusted with faint hair, the kind of arms that could hold you steady through any storm. His scent cedar, old books, and a hint of something spicy mingled with the rain, creating a warmth that made Elena want to step closer, to breathe him in like a memory she wanted to keep forever. The way he stood, one hip cocked slightly, his jeans pulling taut over his thighs, was effortless, magnetic, like a page you couldn't stop turning. The rain hadn't stopped, and neither had the pull between them. Their conversation about rain, books, and moments lost to storm shad, woven a thread of intimacy, fragile but undeniable. Elena felt it in the way her body leaned toward him, her hips tilting unconsciously, her fingers twitching with the urge to brush against his. Noah felt it in the way his breath caught when she laughed, how his hands itched to close the distance, to feel the warmth of her skin under his fingertips. The awning was too small for strangers to stand so close, yet neither moved away. The space between them was electric, alive with the hum of something new, something neither could name but both wanted to chase. Elena shifted, her boots scuffing the wet pavement, and a shiver ran through her, not from the cold, but from the weight of Noah's gaze. She glanced at the steps leading up to the cafe's door, a narrow set of concrete slabs slick with rain, and without thinking, she sank onto the lowest one, her knees bending gracefully, her jacket riding up to reveal a sliver of her lower back, smooth and golden. The movement was small, but it felt like a decision, a quiet surrender to the moment. Noah watched, his eyes tracing the curve of her spine, the way her hair fell over one shoulder, and something in his chest tightened a longing to sit beside her, to share her space, to be part of whatever this was. He hesitated, then followed, lowering himself onto the step beside her, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. The air between them grew warmer, heavier, as if the rain had sealed them in a world of their own. They sat in silence for a moment, the rain's lock-talk filling the space where words might have been. The street stretched out before them, empty save for the occasional car, slicing through puddles, its headlights painting fleeting arcs of gold across the wet asphalt. Elena's hands rested on her knees, her fingers long and delicate, the nails slightly chipped but elegant in their imperfection. Noah's hands, stronger, rougher, rested beside hers, and the contrast was striking her grace against his quiet strength, like a photograph and its frame. Their breaths were visible in the cool air, mingling in soft clouds that seemed to dance between them. Elena shivered again, her shoulders hunching slightly, and Noah noticed, his eyes softening with a concern that felt too deep for someone he'd just met. "Cold?" he asked, his voice low, a velvet rumble that seemed to wrap around her like a blanket. His eyes searched hers, and the way he tilted his head, his damp hair falling across his forehead, made her want to reach out, to brush it back, to feel the warmth of his skin under her fingers. "A little," she admitted, her voice soft, tinged with the faint hilt of her heritage. Her lips curved into a small smile, and the dimple on her left cheek appeared, a detail that made Noah's heart skip. She hugged her arms around herself, and the movement pulled her jacket tighter, accentuating the gentle swell of her chest, the slender dip of her waist. Noah's gaze flickered there for a moment, then returned to her face, but not before a flush of warmth spread through her, as if his eyes had traced her skin. He shifted, turning slightly toward her, and his knee brushed hers, a fleeting contact that sent a spark through them both. Neither pulled away. Instead, Elena felt her body relax, her thigh resting lightly against his, the denim of their jeans a thin barrier between their warmth. Noah's hand, resting on the step, was inches from hers, and when he moved to brace himself, their fingers brushed. It was accidental, or maybe it wasn't, but the touch was electric, her skin soft and cool, his warm and slightly rough, like the pages of a well-loved book. Neither withdrew, letting their hands linger, the tips of their fingers barely touching, a silent agreement that this moment was theirs. Elena's eyes drifted to the street, to the rain-slicked pavement that shimmered under the streetlights. "It's strange," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "how rain makes everything feel closer, like the world shrinks to just this." She gestured vaguely at the space around them, but her eyes flicked to him, and the words felt like they were meant for him alone. Noah nodded, his gaze following hers to the street, but his attention was on Hearth, the way her lips moved when she spoke, the way her breath caught slightly, the way her hair clung to her neck in damp curls. "Yeah," he said, his voice soft but steady. "Like it's just us and the rain, and nothing else matters." His words were simple, but the way he said them, the way his eyes held hers when he turned back to her, made her heart race. His face was close now, close enough for her to see the faint scar above his eyebrow, the way his lashes framed his eyes like a quiet promise. She wanted to touch that scar, to ask its story, to know every mark and memory that made him who he was. The silence that followed was full, not empty, a silence that spoke of shared warmth, of unspoken questions, of the slow burn of something growing between them. Elena's fingers twitched, brushing against his again, and this time she let them stay, her pinky curling slightly against his. The contact was small, but it felt enormous, like a bridge between two worlds. Noah's breath hitched, and he looked down at their hands, then back at her, his eyes darkening with something that wasn't just curiosity but desire, quiet but undeniable. Her lips parted, and she felt the urge to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she leaned forward, just a fraction, and the movement brought her shoulder closer to his, their warmth mingling in the cool air. Elena's heart was a drumbeat, steady but loud, and she felt it in her chest, her throat, her fingertips. She glanced at him, and the way he was looking at her, steady, open, with a heat that made her skin humade, her feel seen in a way she hadn't in years. Her past, the heartbreak she'd carried like a heavy suitcase, felt lighter here, under this awning, with this man whose name she barely knew but whose presence felt like home. She wanted to tell him that, to tell him about the love she'd lost, the walls she'd built, but the words felt too big, too soon. Instead, she said, "I used to think I'd never let myself love again." The confession slipped out, raw and unguarded, and her voice trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of speaking it aloud. Noah didn't respond right away. His eyes softened, and he reached into his pocket, pulling out a small thermos he'd grabbed from the cafe earlier. He unscrewed the cap, and the scent of chamomile tea wafted between them, warm and soothing. He poured some into the cap and handed it to her, his fingers brushing hers again, deliberate this time. "Here," he said, his voice a quiet anchor. "It's not much, but it's warm." The gesture was simple, but it felt more like he was offering her not just tea, but a moment of care, a reason to stay. Elena took the cap, her fingers curling around its warmth, and she looked at him, her eyes searching his face. His smile was small, almost shy, but his gaze was steady, and the way he looked at her like she was a story he wanted to read slowly, page by page, made her chest ache. She sipped the tea, the warmth spreading through her, and she felt her body relax, her shoulders softening, her thigh pressing a little closer to his. The rain fell on, a silver curtain around them, and the world beyond the awning faded to a hum. They sat there, side by side, their hands still touching, their breaths syncing with the rhythm of the storm. Noah's voice broke the silence, soft but clear. "You don't have to decide anything now," he said, his eyes on the street but his words for her. About love or anything else, sometimes the rain just gives you time to figure it out. His tone was gentle, but there was a weight to it, a promise that he wasn't going anywhere, not yet. Elena looked at him, her lips curving into a smile that was both grateful and bold. "Maybe," she said, her voice steady now, "but I'm starting to think the rain's pretty good at making decisions for me." Her eyes held his, and for a moment, the world was just them two strangers on a step, their hands brushing, their hearts beating louder than the storm. The rain kept falling, and the story between them grew, wordless but alive, a spark that burned brighter with every shared glance, every accidental touch. They didn't move, didn't need to. The awning, the steps, the rain, they were enough for now. The rain in Seattle had softened to a gentle drizzle, but its presence lingered, a delicate veil that kept Elena Hoyne and Noah Bennett tethered to their shared moment on the cafe steps. The street glistened under the streetlights, its wet cobblestones reflecting the city's quiet pulse, while the air carried the mingled scents of rain, coffee, and the faint musk of old brick. Elena sat with her knees drawn up slightly, her leather jacket hugging her slender frame, accentuating the graceful curve of her waist and the subtle swell of her hips. At 28, she was a study in understated allure. Her dark, wavy hair, still damp from the storm, cascaded in loose tendrils that framed her face, clinging to her golden olive skin in a way that seemed to invite touch. Her almond-shaped eyes, deep and luminous, held a mix of vulnerability and quiet fire, their depths reflecting the street's soft glow. Her full lips, naturally glossy from the mist, parted slightly as she breathed, a small, unconscious gesture that made her seem both fragile and magnetic. Her high cheekbones caught the light, and the delicate curve of her neck, exposed where her jacket collar fell open, was a canvas of smooth skin that begged to be traced. She was beautiful in a way that felt like a secret, one you wanted to whisper to yourself in the dark. Noah sat beside her, his broad shoulders relaxed, his navy sweater clinging to his chest in a way that hinted at the lean muscle beneath. At 30, he was the kind of man who seemed to belong in moments like this. His chestnut hair, curling at the edges from the rain, brushed the tops of his ears, tempting fingers to tuck it back. His hazel eyes, flecked with gold, were warm and searching, holding a depth that made you want to lean closer to unravel the stories they told without words. His jawline, sharp but softened by a day's stubble, curved into a smile that was both gentle and electric, and his forearms, exposed where his sleeves were rolled up, were strong, freckled, with a faint dusting of hair that spoke of quiet strength. His scent cedar, old books, and a trace of something spicy wove through the damp air, grounding Elena in a way that made her heart ache with a longing she hadn't named. The way he sat, one leg bent, his jeans pulling taut over his thighs, was effortless, magnetic, like a melody you couldn't stop humming. Their hands, still brushing from their moment on the step, had parted, but the memory of that touch lingered, a spark that hadn't faded. Elena felt it in the way her fingers tingled, how her body seemed to tilt toward him without her permission. Noah felt it in the way his pulse quickened when she shifted, her shoulder grazing his, her warmth a quiet contrast to the cool air. The rain had slowed, and with it, the world seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what came next. The awning above them dripped in slow, rhythmic plinks, and the street was empty, save for the occasional passerby hurrying through the mist. They could have left, should have, perhaps, but neither moved. The moment was too alive, too precious, to let go. Noah turned to her, his eyes catching hers in the dim light. "The rain's letting up," he said, his voice low, a velvet rumble that seemed to curl around her like a caress. "But I'm not ready to say goodbye to this." His words were simple, but the way he said them, the way his gaze held hers without wavering, made her breath catch. His lips curved into a small, almost shy smile, and the crinkle at the corners of his eyes made her want to reach out, to touch his face, to feel the warmth of his skin under her fingertips. Elena's lips parted, and she felt a flush of warmth spread across her cheeks, a soft pink that glowed against her skin. "Me neither," she said, her voice soft but steady, tinged with the faint hilt of her heritage. Her eyes searched his, and for a moment, they were all that existed, two strangers who felt like anything but, caught in a moment that felt like fate. She shifted, her knee brushing his, and the contact sent a shiver through her, not from the cold, but from the way his presence seemed to fill every corner of her awareness. His thigh was warm against hers, the denim a thin barrier between their skin, and she felt a sudden, irrational urge to press closer, to feel more of him. Noah's smile widened, and he tilted his head, his damp hair falling across his forehead in a way that made her heart skip. "Come with me," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, an invitation wrapped in possibility. "My bookstore is just across the street. It's warm, dry, and I think you'd like it." His eyes held a glint of mischief, but there was something deeper, something that made her feel like he was offering more than just shelter, a chance to step into his world, to see what lay beyond this rain-soaked moment. Elena hesitated, but only for a heartbeat. Her lips curved into a smile, and the dimple on her left cheek appeared, a detail that made Noah's chest tighten with a longing he hadn't expected. "Okay," she said, her voice barely above the drizzle's murmur. She stood, her movements graceful, her jacket riding up slightly to reveal a sliver of her lower back, smooth and golden, a glimpse that made Noah's breath hitch. He stood too, his height, a quiet presence beside her, his broad shoulders casting a shadow that felt like protection. They crossed the street together, their steps sinking without effort, the drizzle kissing their skin as they moved. Elena's hair caught the mist, its dark waves shimmering, and Noah's sweater clung to his frame, outlining the strength of his back, the subtle flex of his arms as he walked. The bookstore, Pages and Puddles, was a small, weathered building with a faded green door and a window display of stacked books and fairy lights. Noah pushed the door open, and a soft bell chimed, welcoming them into a world of warmth and quiet magic. The air inside was rich, with the scent of old paper, polished wood, and a faint trace of lavender from a candle burning somewhere out of sight. The space was cozy, intimate, with shelves that reached the ceiling, their dark wood groaning under the weight of books. A worn leather armchair sat in one corner, a plaid blanket draped over its back, and a small counter near the door held a kettle and a stack of mismatched mugs. Fairy lights were strung along the walls, casting a golden glow that made the room feel like a secret, a place where time didn't matter. Elena stepped inside, her boots leaving faint wet prints on the hardwood floor, and her eyes widened, taking it all in. "This is..." she trailed off, her voice soft, as if afraid to disturb the room's quiet spell. She turned to Noah, her lips parting in a smile that lit her face, making her eyes sparkle. "It's perfect." Her jacket was still damp, clinging to her shoulders, and the way she stood, one hip cocked slightly, her camera bag slung low, was effortlessly alluring, like a photograph you couldn't stop staring at. Noah's smile was warm, almost proud, as he watched her. "Glad you think so," he said, his voice a low hum that seemed to resonate in her chest. He moved to a small record player tucked behind the counter, his fingers brushing the needle, with a care that made Elena imagine those hands touching her with the same gentleness. He selected a vinyl, and soon, the soft strains of jazz filled the Ruma saxophone's mournful wail, underpinned by the steady pulse of a bass. The kind of music that felt like a slow dance even when you were standing still. The sound wrapped around them, intimate and warm, and Elena felt her body relax, her shoulders softening, her breath sinking with the melody. She wandered to a shelf, her fingers trailing along the spines of books, their leather and cloth bindings, a tactile pleasure. Her movements were slow, deliberate, and Noah watched, captivated by the way her hand moved, how her fingers curled slightly, their nails catching the light. Her hair fell over one shoulder, and the way it brushed her neck, damp and curling, made him want to step closer, to tuck it back, to feel the softness of her skin. She turned, catching his gaze, and her lips curved into a teasing smile. "You're staring," she said, her voice playful, but with an undercurrent that made his pulse quicken. "Caught me," he said, his grin boyish but his eyes dark with something deeper. He stepped closer, stopping just short of her, close enough for her to feel the warmth of his body, to catch the faint spice of his scent. "But in my defense, it's hard not to." His voice was low, almost a whisper, and the way he looked at her like she was the only thing in the room, the only thing that mattered made her heart race. Her lips parted, and she felt a flush of warmth spread across her chest, her skin tingling under his gaze. Elena tilted her head, her eyes searching his, and the air between them thickened, charged with a tension that was both thrilling and terrifying. "You're not so bad to look at either," she said, her voice bold but soft, a dare wrapped in a confession. Her smile was shy, but her eyes were steady, and the way she stood, her body angled toward him, her hips tilting slightly, was an invitation she didn't fully realize she was making. Noah's breath hitched, and he took a half step closer, their bodies now only a breath apart. She could see the faint scar above his eyebrow, the way his lashes framed his eyes, the slight curve of his lips as he fought a smile. He was close enough for her to feel the heat radiating from him, to imagine what it would be like to press her palm to his chest, to feel his heartbeat under her fingers. The jazz played on, its notes weaving through the silence. And Elena felt a pull, a need to say something, to break the tension, or maybe to lean into it. She glanced at the shelves, her eyes catching on a row of novels, their titles a blur of gold and black. "So," she said, her voice lighter now, but still carrying that undercurrent of warmth, "got any books about two strangers falling in love after a rainstorm?" Her eyes flicked back to his, and the question was playful, but there was a weight to it, a hope that made her heart skip. Noah's smile was slow, deliberate, and it sent a shiver down her spine. He leaned in, just a fraction, his face close enough for her to see the flecks of gold in his eyes, to feel the warmth of his breath against her cheek. "Not yet," he said, his voice a low murmur that seemed to vibrate through her. "But maybe we could write one." His words were a spark, igniting something in her chest, and the way he looked at her, his eyes tracing the curve of her lips, the slope of her cheek, made her feel like she was already a story, one he wanted to read slowly, page by page. Elena's breath caught, and she felt her body sway toward him, her lips parting as if to speak, but no words came. The space between them was alive, electric, and she felt the urge to close it, to touch him, to see if his skin was as warm as it looked, if his lips were as soft as they seemed. Noah's hand twitched, as if he felt the same pull, but he held back, letting the moment stretch, letting the jazz and the rain and the warmth of the bookstore hold them together. They stood there, caught in each other's gravity, the world outside fading to a hum, and the connection between them unspoken, unreasoned grew stronger, a flame that burned brighter with every shared glance, every unspoken word. The drizzle outside continued, a soft reminder of the storm that had brought them here, and the bookstore felt like a sanctuary, a place where they could be whoever they wanted, without the weight of the past or the uncertainty of the future. Elena's fingers brushed the edge of a book, and she looked at Noah, her smile both shy and bold. "I think I'd like that," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but it carried a promise, a willingness to see where this story led. Noah's eyes softened, and he nodded, his smile a quiet vow. "Good," he said, his voice warm, steady, like a hand reaching out in the dark. "Let's see how the first chapter goes." And with that, the moment shifted, not breaking but growing, a new page turning in a story neither of them could predict, but both wanted to write. The drizzle outside pages and puddles had returned, a soft, persistent whisper against the bookstore's windows, sealing Elena Hoyne and Noah Bennett in their private world. The jazz record spun on, its saxophone weaving a languid melody that curled through the air, mingling with the scent of old paper, polished wood, and the faint lavender glow of a candle flickering on a shelf. The bookstore was a cocoon, its fairy lights casting golden pools across the hardwood floor, illuminating the shelves that stretched to the ceiling, heavy with stories waiting to be told. Elena stood near a row of novels, her fingers still lingering on a leather-bound spine, her leather jacket slightly askew, revealing the delicate curve of her collarbone. At 28, she was a vision of quiet allure her. Dark, wavy hair, loosened from its bun, fell in soft cascades over her shoulders, its damp ends brushing her golden olive skin. Her almond-shaped eyes, deep and luminous, held a spark of curiosity and a warmth that made her seem both vulnerable and untouchable. Her full lips, kissed by the mist, curved into a faint smile, their natural gloss catching the light in a way that made them impossible to ignore. Her slender frame, wrapped in a jacket that clung to her curves, moved with a grace that was effortless yet magnetic, her hips swaying slightly as she shifted her weight, her long legs accentuated by jeans that hugged her like a second skin. She was a photograph you couldn't stop staring at, a moment you wanted to capture and hold forever. Noah stood a breath away, his broad shoulders filling the space with a quiet strength, his navy sweater clinging to his chest, hinting at the lean muscle beneath. At 30, he was the kind of man who seemed made for rainy nights, chestnut hair, still damp, curled at the edges, brushing his ears in a way that begged to be touched. His hazel eyes, flecked with gold, were warm and steady, holding a depth that made you want to lean closer, to lose yourself in their stories. His jawline, sharp but softened by stubble, curved into a smile that was both boyish and electric, and his forearms, exposed where his sleeves were rolled up, were strong, freckled, with a faint dusting of hair that spoke of care and capability. His scent cedar, old books, and a trace of spice wrapped around her, grounding her in a way that made her heart ache with a longing she couldn't quite name. The way he stood, one hip cocked, his jeans pulling taut over his thighs, was effortless, magnetic, like a song you couldn't stop humming. Their earlier words about writing a book, about strangers falling in love after a rainstorm hung in the air, a spark that hadn't faded but grown, fanned by the closeness of their bodies, the warmth of their shared glances. Elena felt it in the way her skin hummed, how her fingers tingled with the urge to reach for him. Noah felt it in the way his pulse quickened when she smiled, how his hands itched to close the distance, to feel the softness of her skin. The bookstore was their sanctuary, the rain their conspirator, and the jazz their heartbeat, urging them closer with every note. Noah's eyes held hers, and he tilted his head, his damp hair falling across his forehead in a way that made her want to brush it back, to feel the warmth of his skin under her fingers. "You want to see something special?" he asked, his voice low, a velvet rumble that seemed to curl around her like a caress. His smile was small, almost shy, but his gaze was steady, and the way he looked at her like she was the only story worth reading made her breath catch. Elena's lips parted, and a flush of warmth spread across her cheeks, a soft pink that glowed against her skin. "Show me," she said, her voice soft but bold, tinged with the faint lilt of her heritage. Her eyes sparkled with curiosity, and the dimple on her left cheek appeared, a detail that made Noah's chest tighten with a longing he hadn't expected. She stepped closer, her boots whispering against the hardwood, and the movement brought her near enough for him to catch the faint scent of her rain, leather, and something floral, like jasmine after a storm. Noah gestured toward a narrow staircase tucked behind a shelf, its wooden steps worn smooth by years of use. "Up here," he said, his voice a quiet invitation. He led the way, his movements fluid, his broad shoulders shifting under his sweater as he climbed. Elena followed, her eyes tracing the line of his back, the subtle flex of his arms, the way his jeans hugged his hips. The staircase creaked softly, and the air grew warmer as they ascended, the bookstore's cozy glow giving way to a smaller, more intimate space. The second floor was a hidden Jima small room with slanted ceilings, a single window streaked with rain, and a worn velvet chaise longue draped with a knitted throw. A low bookshelf lined one wall, its titles a mix of poetry and obscure novels, and a small table held a cluster of candles, their flames casting dancing shadows across the wood-paneled walls. A rug, faded but soft, covered the floor, and the air was thick with the scent of wax and old paper, a warmth that felt like a hug. Noah lit another candle, his fingers steady as he struck a match, and the soft glow illuminated his face, highlighting the sharp angle of his jaw, the faint scar above his eyebrow. The way his eyes seemed to hold 1,000 unspoken words. Elena stepped into the room, her breath catching at its intimacy, its quiet magic. "This is your hideaway," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, as if afraid to disturb the spell. She turned to him, her lips curving into a smile that lit her face, making her eyes sparkle. Her jacket was still damp, clinging to her shoulders, and the way she stood, one hand resting on the back of the chaise, her hips tilted slightly, was effortlessly alluring, like a melody you couldn't stop hearing. Noah nodded, his smile warm, almost proud. "Yeah," he said, his voice a low hum that resonated in her chest. "It's where I come to think, to read, to be." His eyes held hers, and the way he said it, The way his gaze traced the curve of her cheek, the slope of her neck, made her feel like she was part of that sacred space, like she belonged here with him. He moved to the chaise, sinking onto it with a casual grace, his long legs stretching out, his hands resting loosely on his thighs. The movement pulled his sweater tighter across his chest, and Elena's gaze flickered there, imagining the warmth of his skin, the steady beat of his heart. She hesitated, then joined him, perching on the edge of the chaise, close enough to feel the heat of his body, to catch the faint spice of his scent. The space between them was small, charged, and she felt her body lean toward him, her knee brushing his, the contact sending a shiver through her. His thigh was warm against hers, the denim a thin barrier, and she felt a sudden, irrational urge to press closer, to feel more of him. Noah's eyes darkened, and he shifted, turning slightly toward her, his arm resting along the back of the chaise, his fingers inches from her shoulder. The candlelight played across his face, highlighting the curve of his lips, the faint stubble on his jaw, and she wanted to touch him, to trace the lines of his face, to know every mark and memory that made him who he was. They sat in silence for a moment, the rain's soft patter against the window, blending with the jazz drifting up from below. The air was heavy, not with tension, but with possibility, a warmth that made her skin hum. Elena's fingers twitched, and she reached for the throw, pulling it over her lap, her movements slow, deliberate. The motion brought her closer to Noah, her shoulder grazing his arm, and neither pulled away. Instead, she felt her body relax, her thigh pressing a little closer to his, the warmth of their contact, a quiet anchor in the flickering light. Noah's voice broke the silence, soft but clear. You ever feel like some moments are meant to happen? His eyes searched hers, and the way he tilted his head, his damp hair falling across his forehead, made her want to reach out, to brush it back, to feel the warmth of his skin. His words were simple, but they carried a weight, a question that hung between them like a dare. Elena's lips parted, and she felt a flush of warmth spread across her chest, her skin tingling under his gaze. "Yeah," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but it carried a certainty she hadn't expected. "Like this one." Her eyes held his, and for a moment, the world was just them two strangers in a candlelit room, their breaths sinking with the rain, their hearts beating louder than the storm. Noah's smile was slow, deliberate, and it sent a shiver down her spine. He leaned in, just a fraction, his face close enough for her to see the flecks of gold in his eyes, to feel the warmth of his breath against her cheek. "Good," he said, his voice a low murmur that seemed to vibrate through her, "because I don't want this moment to end." His words were a spark, igniting something in her chest, and the way he looked at her, his eyes tracing the curve of her lips, the slope of her neck, made her feel like she was already his, in a way that was both thrilling and terrifying. The space between them shrank, not by choice, but by instinct, their bodies drawn together like magnets. Elena's hand rested on the chaise, inches from his, and when she shifted, their fingers brushed a fleeting contact that felt like fire. His skin was warm, rough in a way that spoke of work and care, and she didn't pull away. Instead, she let her fingers linger, her pinky curling slightly against his, a silent agreement that this was real, that this was theirs. Noah's breath hitched, and he looked down at their hands, then back at her, his eyes darkening with a desire that was quiet but undeniable. The candlelight flickered, casting shadows that danced across their faces, and the jazz swelled, its notes urging them closer. Elena felt her body sway toward him, her lips parting as if to speak, but no words came. Instead, she leaned in, her shoulder pressing against his arm, her face close enough to feel the heat radiating from him. Noah's hand moved, slow and deliberate, his fingers brushing her shoulder, trailing down her arm in a touch that was light but electric. Her skin tingled under his touch, and she felt a warmth spread through her, slow and deep, like the first sip of wine. Their eyes locked, and the world fell away the rain, the bookstore, the past, the future. There was only this moment, this closeness, this pull that neither could resist. Noah's hand slid to her wrist, his thumb brushing the soft skin there, and the contact sent a shiver through her, her pulse racing under his touch. Elena's lips parted, and she felt the urge to close the distance, to taste the warmth of his mouth, to know if his kiss was as gentle as his touch. Noah's eyes searched hers, asking a question without words, and she answered with a small, almost imperceptible nod, her breath catching in her throat. He leaned in, slow and deliberate, his face close enough for her to see the faint scar above his eyebrow, the way his lashes framed his eyes like a quiet promise. His lips brushed hers, soft at first, like the first drops of rain, tentative but full of intent. The kiss was gentle, exploratory, but it deepened quickly, a slow burn that ignited something fierce in her chest. His lips were warm, soft, yet firm, and they moved against hers with a care that made her feel cherished, wanted. Elena's hand found his chest, her fingers curling into his sweater, feeling the steady beat of his heart under her palm. His hand slid to her neck, his fingers threading into her hair, their damp strands slipping through his grasp as he tilted her head, deepening the kiss. The kiss was a storm soft at first, then wild, a rush of heat and want that consumed them both. Elena's body pressed closer, her thigh sliding against his, the denim a thin barrier between their warmth. Noah's other hand found her waist, his fingers splaying across the curve of her hip, pulling her closer, his touch both gentle and possessive. Her skin burned under his hands, and she felt a moan rise in her throat, swallowed by the kiss, by the way his lips claimed hers with a hunger that matched her own. The chaise creaked under their weight, and the throw slipped to the floor, forgotten as their bodies moved together, a dance of instinct and desire. The rain outside fell harder, its rhythm matching the pounding of their hearts, and the candlelight flickered, casting their shadows against the wall, a tangle of limbs and longing. Elena's hands slid up his chest, her fingers tracing the line of his collarbone, the strong curve of his shoulders, memorizing the feel of him. Noah's lips left hers, trailing to her jaw, her neck, his breath hot against her skin, sending shivers down her spine. She arched into him, her head tilting back, her hair spilling over her shoulders, and his lips found the pulse at her throat, kissing it with a reverence that made her heart ache. They pulled back, breathless, their foreheads resting together, their breaths mingling in the candlelit air. Noah's eyes were dark, his pupils wide, but his smile was soft, almost shy, as if he couldn't believe this was real. Elena's lips were swollen, her cheeks flushed, and she smiled back, her fingers still curled into his sweater, unwilling to let go. "That was," she started, her voice hoarse, but she trailed off, unable to find words for what had just happened. "Yeah," Noah said, his voice a low rumble, his thumb brushing her cheek, tracing the curve of her smile. It was. His eyes held hers, and there was no need for more words, no need for explanations. The kiss had said everything, every hope, every fear, every spark of something new. They stayed like that, tangled together on the chaise, their hands still touching, their bodies close. The night stretched on, unplanned, unhurried, a series of moments strung together by candlelight and rain. They talked in whispers, their voices soft against the jazz, sharing stories of childhood, of dreams, of the small things that made them who they were. Elena's head rested on his shoulder, her hair brushing his neck, and Noah's arm wrapped around her, his fingers tracing lazy circles on her arm. The rain fell, the candles burned low, and the bookstore held them close, a sanctuary for a night that neither had expected, but both would remember forever. The rain had softened to a faint murmur outside pages and puddles, its gentle patter against the bookstore's windows, a quiet echo of the storm that had brought Elena Hoyne and Noah Bennett together. Dawn was creeping in, painting the Seattle sky in hues of lavender and gold, the first rays of sunlight filtering through the rain-streaked glass, casting delicate patterns across the hardwood floor. The candlelit room on the second floor, where they'd spent the night tangled in whispers and kisses, felt like a dream suspended in time. The air was still thick with the scent of wax, old paper, and the lingering warmth of their closeness, the jazz record long since silent, leaving only the rain and their breaths to fill the space. Elena sat on the velvet chaise, her leather jacket draped over the armrest, her dark, wavy hair spilling over her shoulders in soft, unruly cascades. At 28, she was a vision of raw, effortless beauty, golden olive skin glowing in the morning light, her almond-shaped eyes deep and luminous, holding a mix of wonder and uncertainty. Her full lips, still slightly swollen from their kisses, curved into a faint, contemplative smile, and her slender frame, now relaxed in a borrowed sweater from Noah, hugged her curves in a way that was both vulnerable and magnetic. Her long legs, crossed at the ankles, stretched out before her, the jeans clinging to her thighs like a second skin, and the way she tilted her head, exposing the delicate curve of her neck, was a silent invitation. A question she hadn't yet answered. Noah sat beside her, his broad shoulders slouched slightly, his navy sweater rumpled from the night, clinging to his chest in a way that hinted at the lean muscle beneath. At 30, he was the embodiment of a rainy day dream. His chestnut hair, tousled and curling at the edges, brushed his ears, tempting fingers to tuck it back. His hazel eyes, flecked with gold, were warm and steady, holding a depth that made you want to dive in and never resurface. His jawline, sharp but softened by stubble, curved into a smile that was both gentle and electric, and his forearms, exposed where his sleeves were still rolled up, were strong, freckled, with a faint dusting of hair that spoke of quiet strength. His scent cedar, old books, and a trace of spice lingered in the air, wrapping around Elena like a memory she wasn't ready to let go. The way he sat, one leg bent, his jeans pulling taut over his thighs, was effortless, magnetic, like a story you couldn't stop reading. The night had been a tapestry of moments, kisses that burned like fire, whispers that felt like secrets, and silences that spoke louder than words. They'd shared pieces of themselves, Elena's dreams of capturing the world through her lens, Noah's love for stories that lived in the margins of old books. Their hands had found each other, their fingers intertwining, his rough warmth against her soft coolness, a contrast that felt like home. But now, as the sun rose, the weight of reality crept in, a quiet reminder that moments, no matter how perfect, couldn't last forever. Elena's bus was scheduled to leave at 9, a ticket to Portland tucked in her bag, a plan made before the rain, before Noah, before this night that had changed everything. The thought of leaving tightened her chest, but so did the thought of staying, of stepping into something unknown, something that felt too big, too soon. Noah's eyes searched hers, and he leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, his hands clasped loosely, his fingers still bearing the faint warmth of her touch. "You don't have to go," he said, his voice low, a velvet rumble that curled around her like a caress. His words were gentle, not pleading, but they carried a hope that made her heart ache. His smile was small, almost shy, and the way he tilted his head, his damp hair falling across his forehead, made her want to reach out, to brush it back, to feel the warmth of his skin one more time. His eyes held hers, steady and open, and she saw the question there, not just about today, but about tomorrow, about what could be. Elena's lips parted, and a flush of warmth spread across her cheeks, a soft pink that glowed against her skin. She looked down at her hands, her fingers twisting the hem of the sweater, its soft fabric, a reminder of Noah's quiet care. "I don't know what to do," she admitted, her voice soft, tinged with the faint lilt of her heritage. Her eyes flicked up to his, and the vulnerability in them was raw, unguarded, a window to the heart she'd thought she'd closed forever. "Last night, it was everything, but I'm scared. Scared of what it means, scared of what happens next." Her words hung between them, honest and heavy, and she bit her lip, a quick, unconscious gesture that drew Noah's gaze to her mouth, to the lips he'd kissed until they both forgot the world. Noah's smile softened, and he reached out, his hand hovering for a moment before settling on hers, his fingers curling around her slender ones, his thumb brushing the soft skin of her wrist. The contact was electric, a spark that traveled through her, warming her from the inside out. His hand was warm, rough, in a way that spoke of work and care, and she felt her pulse race under his touch, her body leaning toward him without her permission. "You don't have to decide everything now," he said, his voice steady, a quiet anchor in the morning light. "But if you stay, I'll be here, and if you go, I'll still be here, hoping you come back." His eyes held hers, and the way he said it, the way his gaze traced the curve of her cheek, the slope of her neck, made her feel like she was already a part of his story, one he wanted to keep writing. Elena's breath caught, and she felt a tear prick at the corner of her eye, not from sadness, but from the weight of possibility. She looked at him, really looked at him, the faint scar above his eyebrow, the way his lashes framed his eyes like a quiet promise, the curve of his lips that had kissed her with a reverence that still lingered on her skin. His presence was a warmth she hadn't known she needed, a light in the shadows of her past. She wanted to stay, to sink into this moment, to see what this spark could become. But the bus ticket, the life she'd planned, the fear of falling too fast, they pulled at her, a tether to a world she wasn't sure she could leave behind. She stood, her movements slow, deliberate, and Noah followed, his height a quiet presence beside her. They descended the staircase, the creak of the wood a soft reminder of the night they'd shared. The bookstore was still warm, its fairy lights glowing, But the morning light brought a clarity that was both beautiful and daunting. Elena's bag sat by the counter, a small, practical thing that held her camera, her clothes, her plans. She picked it up, her fingers tightening around the strap, and turned to Noah, her eyes searching his face. "What if I don't go?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, but it carried a weight, a hope that made her heart race. "What happens then?" Noah's smile was slow, deliberate, and it sent a shiver down her spine. He stepped closer, close enough for her to feel the heat of his body, to catch the faint spice of his scent. "I'd make you tea," he said, his voice a low murmur that seemed to vibrate through her. "And we'd figure it out, one moment at a time." His eyes held hers, and the way he looked at her like she was a story he wanted to read slowly, page by page, made her chest ache. His hand reached out, his fingers brushing her cheek, tracing the curve of her smile, and the touch was gentle, reverent, a promise of more moments like this. Elena's lips parted, and she leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering closed for a moment, savoring the warmth of his hand, the steadiness of his presence. She wanted to say yes, to stay, to let this night become a beginning. But the clock on the wall ticked closer to 9, and the weight of her decision pressed against her, a choice she wasn't ready to make. She opened her eyes, meeting his gaze, and saw the hope there, the quiet strength that made her believe, just for a moment, that she could choose this, choose him. She stepped back, her hand slipping from his, and the space between them felt like a chasm, though it was only a foot. "I need to think," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. She slung her bag over her shoulder, her movements graceful but heavy, and walked to the door, her boots whispering against the hardwood. Noah followed, his steps quiet, his presence a warmth at her back. He opened the door, and the cool morning air rushed in, carrying the scent of rain and possibility. They stepped outside, under the same awning where they'd met, the cafe across the street still quiet, its neon sign flickering faintly. The street was waking up, a few early risers hurrying through the drizzle. But to Elena and Noah, it was still their world, their moment. Noah stood close, his hands in his pockets, his eyes never leaving her face. He didn't ask her to stay again, didn't need Toa's gaze, said it all. A silent vow that he'd wait, that he'd be here, no matter what she chose. Elena turned to him, her lips curving into a smile that was both grateful and uncertain. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft but clear. "For last night, for everything." Her eyes held his, and for a moment she saw the future life of rainy days, warm bookstores, and his hand in hers. But the bus was waiting, and so was the unknown, a path she'd set out on before this night, before him. Noah nodded, his smile warm, steady, like a hand reaching out in the dark. "Anytime," he said, his voice a quiet promise. "And if you change your mind, you know where to find me." His eyes crinkled at the corners, and the way he looked at her, like she was a story he'd never tire of reading, made her heart skip. She took a step back, her boots scuffing the wet pavement, and then another, her eyes still locked on his. The drizzle kissed her skin, and she felt the weight of her bag, the pull of her plans, the spark of what could be. She turned, walking toward the bus stop, her hair catching the morning light, her silhouette a graceful shadow against the waking city. But at the corner, under the same awning where they'd met, she stopped, her heart pounding, her breath catching. She looked back, and Noah was still there, standing in the doorway, his hands in his pockets, his eyes steady, hopeful, waiting. The sky was clearing, the sun breaking through the clouds, and Elena stood there, caught between two worlds, the one she'd planned and the one she'd found. Would she board the bus, chasing the life she'd set out for? Or would she turn back, stepping into the unknown with a man who felt like home? The choice was hers, and the answer lay just beyond this moment, a story waiting to be written. And you, dear reader, will have to wait to find out what Elena chooses. The next chapter of their story, full of rain, love, and the choices that shape us, is coming soon. Follow my channel to discover what happens next. Will Elena stay, or will she go? The rain hasn't stopped whispering, and neither has their story.